Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. US greenlights strikes against Russia with US weapons. A very unexpected move, but very welcomed one indeed. Russia and US supposedly are discussing another peace proposal, and I'm rolling my eyes internally right now, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And finally, Russia has the epidemic of Russians profiteering from dead Russians. Such is the case inside that country. This news and more in today's Ukraine Daily News Show. Let's begin. Very unexpectedly, news broke about Ukrainian strikes in Voronezh region. And it was interesting because these strikes were conducted with some high-precision weapons. And it was definitely not drones or any kind of cruise missiles. So the first assumption was that these were Ukrainian homemade ballistic Krim-2 missiles. However, as it turned out later on, the strike was conducted with 6 ATACMS ballistic missiles that were freshly delivered from United States. For a very long time, Ukraine hasn't really been using ATACMS missiles, as it was considered that stockpiles run dry. Plus, United States was not really approving deep strikes inside Russia with US weapons, despite the fact that it was happening beforehand. Yet now, after a long pause, we see this happening once again. The target was the Baltimore military airfield, hosting a number of Russian planes, and in addition, the Prognovo training ground, which was infamous of training large amounts of Russian troops, and specifically Russians reporting on their internal Telegram channels that it feels like their own comrades have betrayed them, and actually the strikes happened exactly when there was quite a lot of personnel present at these locations. As this is now confirmed, this is now the first strike by the Ukrainians using American weapons that was fully supplied and approved by Donald Trump administration. I mean, I can only welcome such developments. Let's do even more. Ukraine is continuing their campaign against the Russian oil infrastructure. I toned down reporting on every single strike, but the campaign is still happening. And from notable things is the strike against the Ryazan oil refinery. This is already 8th strike against this refinery. If I'm not wrong, it is the 3rd biggest refinery in Russia. Every time after attacks, because there is a lot of capacity and a lot of different stations in that refinery, they were always able to shut it down only partially so far, with further repairs and then reopening that refinery once again to be struck once again. This time marks the first ever strike against this refinery, after which the refinery is now completely shut down. We now have a little bit of understanding of the scale of impact of US and European sanctions on Russia and how the cuts from Indian and Chinese companies are influencing it. It's bad for Russia, so it's good for everyone else, because the reports are that export of Russian oil to China has been cut by 2/3. An absolutely devastating report, if we can believe it. Chinese imports of seaborne Russian crude may drop by 500 to 800,000 barrels a day this month, according to an estimate by industry analytics from Rystad Energy. Inflows from Iran, meanwhile, could fall by 200 to 400,000 barrels a day, or as much as 30%. Second day in the row, we are receiving the news that could literally bury Russia. The only downside of it is the same as I stated yesterday about the drop in general Russian oil prices, is that this is potentially just temporary. And for this to actually impact Russia, this needs to be continued long-term, going after Russian sub-suppliers, introduction of new sanctions, or following up on existing ones. Hard work will make this a reality. But oil obviously is not the only Russian sector that is failing. It is true for a lot of the Russian economy. So just to get you a glimpse, for example, the joint stock company UKRAINY, which is the largest producer of refined silicon in the Russian Federation, will completely halt the production on January 1st, 2026. And the second similar enterprise, UKRAINY Ural, will operate only at partial capacity. Silicon is a main component for microelectronics, the chemical industry, solar panels, and many technological processes altogether. The fact of the matter, one would consider that this is pretty bad, that within an industry, top two factories, one would face complete closure and the second partial shutdown would be considered pretty bad. The problem is, Russia overall has only two factories of refined silicon. We are basically reading here of a death of the whole industry in Russia right now. Following from that, I don't even need to read here past the headlines. Sberbank is the biggest Russian bank, and it will fire 20% of employees deemed ineffective by AI system. I mean, everything is beautiful here. Starting from the fact that it's going to be AI that is going to be assessing how well the employees have been doing in the bank. And secondly, that it's going to be every fifth employee of the Russian biggest national bank fired. This is, I mean, like, what else do you need to get you the perspective that Russia is indeed not doing that well? And then we need to talk about the negotiations once again. Thankfully, this time we're not talking about the highest level possible, so this is just sort of a side story, so just feel entertained and let me tell you about what is happening. So as we know, after Russia spit in the face of US administration's efforts to secure some kind of ceasefire or start some kind of peace deal negotiations, because Kremlin in the face of Lavrov basically rejected the approach by Marco Rubio to try to set up some kind of meeting between first them and later between Trump and Putin, the negotiations completely collapsed because Russian position hasn't really changed by an inch. More than that, Lavrov was even restating some of these fantasy narratives about Nazis in Ukraine, all the territory belonging to Russia, that the Church of Russia should be inside of Ukraine, and that there should be no help from the allies to Ukraine, and Russia will be the security guarantor for the future peace process. Absolute fantasy fiction like. And Marco Rubio, after talking with Lavrov, understanding that nothing literally has changed, he didn't want to put again Trump into the position where he could be potentially humiliated by the perspectives that it paints, such as happened in Anchorage when the efforts by Steve Witkoff to misinform the Donald Trump administration resulted in Trump meeting with Putin and achieving jack shit. And then we hear now that US and Russia are supposedly preparing a new track of negotiations for a potential ceasefire. And I was extremely confused because Russia has not really changed their stance. It was underscored by every source coming from Russia, to answer to which came very, very fast, because it turned out that Steve Witkoff met with his buddy Kirill Dmitriev from Russia that came to US, and they just decided to cook up some kind of a peace deal that would mimic essentially multi-step plan from Gaza. So what is the issue with this? It's an issue both on the Russian side and also on the American side. On American side, as I just described to you, Steve Witkoff has been really pushed aside because he hasn't really delivered on his promises, and more than that, he cost Trump some style points. And secondly, Dmitriev has been a disgraced person. Dmitriev is essentially a nobody in Kremlin. He has no official positions, he has no clout whatsoever. So the only way Dmitriev could do is because he was able to get to talk with Witkoff and present Russian stance in some kind of a new, different way, essentially putting a new coat of paint of this pile of dog shit and trying to present it as the new plan. He has no power and no right and no mandate to alter any of the Russian positions whatsoever. So there is nothing to discuss. Yet these two were talking together, and supposedly they started pushing their narrative, trying to elevate Witkoff in this weird backroom scenario once again, so much so that they were even able to influence some of the members of the US delegation coming to Ukraine, that there is some kind of plan brewing. And more than that, they try to present this plan to President Zelensky while he is now visiting Turkey. And in the same way as Kirill Dmitriev's visit after the failed discussion between Rubio and Lavrov, and Dmitriev flying to United States, going on the TV channels trying to present some kind of a Russian view of the matter, failed after Scott Bessent stated that Dmitriev is just propaganda spreader and he has no say whatsoever. Witkov's attempts is seemingly failing as well, as after he tried to describe what kind of a plan will be presented to Ukraine, it basically absolutely went nowhere, as it was instantly rejected by the President Zelensky, as there was absolutely nothing new in there. It was the same old, same old. So apparently discussion one, if we can believe these journalists Michael Weiss and Oliver Carroll, that the plan was supposedly entailing the reduction of Ukrainian army 2.5 size, only Ukrainian armed forces, so no foreigners in the troops of Ukraine, no foreign diplomats coming to Ukraine, ban on the long-range weapons, and I'm pretty sure that there is also a lot of discussions about that Russia will be the security guarantor. So to describe this whole situation shortly, we have a help coming from our NATO allies supporting Ukraine. Because, to be honest, this meme describes everything that is happening right now perfectly. But I do want to stop on this delegation that came to Kiev from Pentagon. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll was joined by Army Chief of Staff General Randy George and other top Army officials. Colonel Dave Butler said in a statement, hours after Ukrainian police say the last 24 people were killed in a heavy overnight Russian missile and drone attack. So after another Russian attack, US top army representatives that have been known for their extremely pro-Ukrainian position, these guys really clearly understand what is happening here. And while there are reports that they talked with Witkov about his position, I am completely certain that their visit to Ukraine, especially after Ukraine got approved to strike Russia with ATACMS missiles, this shows that there is most likely going to be a potential path going forward, and how US could additionally support Ukrainian efforts to end the war. As I highlighted in this article over here, everything is stemming from one problem and one problem only, which is understood by literally everyone except for a couple of people in the Trump's administration, that Kremlin has shown no signs of changing its terms, and therefore, until it happens, all of this is just another big round of nonsense. Breathe out, guys. Nothing is happening. Just media and some of the pro-Russian assets trying to get themselves back in the game. The rest of the promised Skynex air defense systems from Germany have made their way to Ukraine. These systems have shown themselves to be extremely capable at shooting down the targets that Russia is sending towards Ukraine. In total, this marked the delivery of 4 systems, and it's great to see that the help to Ukraine is actually coming. The first 2 systems were delivered at the start of 2024, and only now the other 2 were delivered. Ukraine is looking how to secure key enterprises on its territory. Protective structures are now being co-financed by the government in Ukraine to be built around the main production sites of weapons for Ukraine. More than that, a new initiative would allow some of the enterprises to essentially create their own anti-air fighting groups, allowing them to protect own critical infrastructure by the private companies. I want to underscore once again these reports that Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi is always there on the front line and operating very closely with brigade commanders. Here we can see clearly that this is a brigade command point, operational command point. So when people state that Syrski doesn't understand what is happening on the front lines, again, there are credible reports that no, he goes there, he talks with actual brigade commanders, and they're able to explain to him the actual situation on the front line, so he is very much so engaged. After the Russian sabotage of blowing up some of the Polish railways leading to Ukraine, firstly, Poland will deploy additional troops to help patrol areas of critical infrastructure. And secondly, because the people that conducted these sabotage operations turned out to be Ukrainian citizens, but not just simple Ukrainian citizens that were prosecuted in Ukraine for working towards Russian goals, for sabotage activities in Ukraine, and they escaped prosecution to the territory of Belarus to then re-enter Poland from the territory of Belarus and conduct sabotage operations on the territory of Poland. An absolutely ridiculous situation. So now finally, I mean, like, wow. Only finally now, we are now discussing that potentially Europeans should be working with Ukrainians to have these people that have been known to be working with Russia be put in the same registry so they would not be able to enter the territory of European Union freely. Absolutely ludicrous scenario that in 3.5 over years of war, only now this is what we're talking about. And finally, stories from Russia that unbelievably are true. Number of black widows in Russia is growing significantly. Soldiers are being sent to fight war in Ukraine, and on being killed, they actually and their family members are receiving quite hefty sums of money. And this obviously makes some people carve a lot of that money pie, including people that are linked to the Russian military service operations and criminal gangs. So they're creating either individually these Black Widow agencies where there are specific people that are trying to get married to the Russian soldiers, some of them even multiple times, and after these Russian soldiers get killed, they just get the payments, or it's an actual criminal gangs that are creating a whole network of operations where Russians are pressured to join the military, after which they signed also the marriage certificate with these women. And more than that, they after that work closely with the commanders of the units where these Russian soldiers are getting sent in order to be sent to a more dangerous parts of frontline to increase the likelihood of them being killed. Here is an example outlined by Foreign Policy. A 40-year-old Serhiy Khadonshko from Bryansk region in October 2023 married Olena Sokolova, an employee of the local military registration and enlistment office. The next day after registering, Khadonshko went to the front, and a few months later he was killed in action. After the death of the soldier, Sokolova applied for compensation. Now, this story, to be honest, I'm not really caring for either one of the parties. I wish good luck to a lot of these parties from both sides, for one to die or not die or whatever, and from the second one to get more Russians killed. I would just wish that they do it even before sending them to Ukraine. It will speed up the receiving of compensation. So here is a pro tip: don't come to Ukraine, just make sure it is on paper. No need for him to come to Ukraine and potentially kill any civilians. Russia in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. And remember, the best thing that we can do is support Ukrainian armed forces. Our mega fundraiser is doing really well. We are now almost at 23,000 as I'm recording this video. Thank you so much for everyone that participated. Let's do more, guys. This is going to be a long-term commitment and we need to do more. Now, people reported some of the issue with payments. I've reported all of those comments to Jugaspa, and they're looking in every one single case of this. And additionally, with the patches that are promised, Jugaspa also stated that don't worry, they have their internal system that just reports whenever there is donations of 100 or more dollars, and they are after that following up individually with emails. So you will be able to get your patches, and they assured me on that. Continue supporting Ukraine, continue trusting Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.